All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For this episode, I was joined by San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, member of the American Institute of Architects, and the founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation, along with his courageous wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. Look at y'all. This is an explosive presentation by Richard, and it's really the smoking gun for me. Indisputable evidence of 9/11 being controlled demolition, inside jobs, certainly. Um, the facts speak for themselves. So come in with an open mind, open heart, absorb this information. It can be a lot to process, but the truth is right there. And I would encourage you guys to share this out because, a lot of times we have these discussions about 9/11 and it being an inside job. And I think a lot of people are open to these discussions. But I haven't found anybody who pieces the evidence together in the way that Richard has. So he has a slides of presentations with uh, while he's talking. So if you're watching on video, you'll get to see some of the videos he brings up, certainly. But this podcast is also accessible for audio only. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the link, if you want to follow along to YouTube and Rumble, will be in the episode show notes for you if you'd rather watch it there. But you will be able to follow along just as well with audio format. So don't you worry, you won't be missing too much if you're on the audio platforms. Um, but I hope you guys enjoy this one and learn from it as much as I did. If you're a fan of the show, you can be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you're on. Leave us a 5-star review, a comment on what you think. And a great way to support the show. Appreciate donations that have been coming in. Because really, I do this show for free. There is no financial incentive for me to do it. In fact, kind of put yourself out there for monetary loss, in a sense, by talking about subjects such as this that are controversial. So I appreciate you guys who do donate to the show. Link to do so if you would like to do. It's in the episode show notes below. And be sure to subscribe to mcdermott.substack.com. That's free, or you can do a paid subscription model, and you'll be notified of every podcast, every poem, article, whatever it may be. That's all on Substack. You can purchase a copy of my latest book, The Final Judgment, which is in the right corner above me over here. It's on Amazon. Be sure to leave a 5-star review there. It's really balancing human reckoning and spiritual awakening and learning and remembering who we are. Great way to support the show is to purchase a copy on Amazon. I appreciate everybody who has already done so. And you can also book a tarot reading with me one-on-one, following the hero's journey format and really uncovering who we are and where we're going. I think that can be a great uh, roadmap tool for self-discovery. So the link to do so if you want to do a live call or just to get a written tarot report, it's in the episode show notes below. And special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. Patty has really allowed us to expand the show in a lot of ways and invested in the show herself. So if you are in South Dakota at all, even nearby, Tranquil Desires is your one stop for all your holistic spiritual needs. And if you go in, tell her the Fifth Dimension sent you. Heaven sent you. Truly, truly wonderful. Thank you, Patty, for your support. Without further ado, let's jump into the podcast with Richard Gage. I hope you enjoy. You going? All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, please welcome San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, member of the American Institute of Architects and the founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation, along with his courageous wife, Gail, over at richardgage911.org. And Richard, as I mentioned before we hopped on, I've been following your work for quite some time now. So it's truly an honor and a blessing to be able to chat with you today. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Evan, and nice to be here with you too. Very much so.
I greatly appreciate it. And there's so much to unpack and explore in this. And as I was saying, and I'm sure the listeners and viewers will see in your presentation if they're not familiar with your work, I really value the way that you're able to demonstrate and articulate the facts here when we start looking at 9/11 truths. But I'd love to hand the floor over to you and where you would like to begin and kind of to unpack this because I know there's so much to actually look at and uncover. So and I think the wherever you would like to begin with that and sort of take the floor, I say we can dive into
All right, then let's begin at the beginning, shall we?
it. Absolutely.
Um, because it takes courage to dive into this for those that haven't yet, particularly. It it it, uh, it turned my world upside down. The truth of the destruction of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11 is and can be overwhelming to those of us who thought we had a pretty clear idea of, you know, that the world, how the world works for us, how our government um, uh, uh, how they're supposed to be protecting us, and here they are, in fact, participating in mass murder. So it is a rude awakening, and I myself came across this in 2006, and I just wasn't ready for it. It shocked me. It made me angry. So I just want to encourage people to give it some time and don't set it aside because it'll eat at you. Look at this evidence, do your own research, and that's what it really takes.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, I'm looking for my presenter. There we go. We need to understand the facts, and we're taking these facts, by the way, and putting them into a docu-film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, taking the hard evidence of 9/11 crimes to court. So I'll tell people how you can watch this and get involved also. It starts with the third tower to be destroyed on 9/11, Building 7. Most people don't even know about it. And yet, it's the third worst structural failure in modern history, the Twin Towers being the first two. Most architects don't even know about this building. I mean, this was a 47-story skyscraper that on the afternoon of 9/11, not having been hit by a plane, drops nevertheless suddenly, symmetrically into its own footprint, as we'll see. This would be the tallest building in most of our states. It's dwarfed, standing next to the tallest buildings in the world at the time they were built, the Twin Towers. It's about a football field in length away from the North Tower. And when the North Tower went down that morning, there was a little bit of damage to this building. But NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked with explaining all three collapses to the American people, they said that damage was not a significant factor in the building's collapse. So what was? Well, let's look at the collapse and see if we can make any references here. The east penthouse, upper left, goes down in an isolated incident. And then after 7 seconds, the entire building does this. And so you might have seen this before in like the old hotels in Las Vegas. But let's see what the official narrative tells us from Shyam Sunder.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, so fires brought this building down. Let's look at those fires. Here they are. As you can see, they're few, they're small, and they're scattered throughout the building. And they are almost burned out. Well, they clearly are burned out on the floor of interest, which is the 12th floor up here, where NIST has them burning, in fact, for 7 hours in and around column 79, their first column to fail. in their initiation of collapse theory. So there's a number of problems with that theory, and we'll get into them if we have time. But we need to note that we've never in history lost a steel frame fire protected structure, which is a type 1 construction in America, in North America at all, and hardly ever around the world. In fact, not a steel frame fire protected structure, though we've had dozens and dozens of much hotter, larger, and longer lasting fires in these buildings. Even after 9/11 and these fully engulfed skyscrapers, they did not come down. So why don't we have these buildings coming down? Well, we can get into that again if we have time, but let's look and compare Building 7's collapse on the right to a series of known controlled demolitions on the left. Is there any similarity? Well, is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame fire protected structure. So it probably should have been the first hypothesis that NIST came up with, but no, it was relegated to a set of very frequently asked questions published about 10 years later on their website. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, what are the features of typical controlled demolitions? And does Building 7 have any of these features? Well, let's start with the first one. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Let's listen to Dan Rather narrate his view of this building's collapse at 5:20 in the afternoon on 9/11 when it collapsed.
And what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, that's what it certainly looks like. Dan is using his intuition here. We all should. We have a frame of reference for this kind of thing. It's happened before, lots of times. We've seen it on TV. But he's never repeated those words. In fact, with only one or two exceptions, after 9/11, we've not seen Building 7 collapse. It's as if it's been swept under the rug. Most architects and engineers, as I mentioned, don't even know about it. We go to conferences all around the country to show them at our evidence booth, and we show them the building coming down. They go, "Oh, what's that? That looks like a controlled demolition." We go, "Yeah, but do you know when it happened?" And they go, "Oh, no, on 9/11. Well, they say, "Well, that's not one of the Twin Towers. It doesn't look like it anyway." Well, what do you mean? We have to go through and tell them, yes, this is the third tower. In fact, watch how straight down it drops. Feature number 2 of controlled demolition. From West Street. Yep, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do you accomplish that in the controlled demolition industry? You have to take out all 24 core columns, the interior ones, followed about a second later by the exterior columns. Any deviation in that pattern and the building will begin to tip over. And that happens a lot, actually. Can these fires cause this level of precision? And, these columns, taking them all out? No. If you don't take them all out, you get something like this, perhaps. The building doesn't go right. Or this. Oh, sorry. Let's play that one through. That can be, of course, a very dangerous situation, as can this. Somebody has to go back into that partially demolished building and fix it so it can be blown up. That's not going to be me. If buildings are damaged on one side, they tend to fall over, like this one. And that is NIST's theory. They say, yes, it was damaged on one corner of this building, the northeast corner, near column 79. So they have a whole elaborate theory that these beams, long span beams, heated up in this fire that they said was burning at the time of the collapse, but it wasn't, and pushed this girder off of its seat on this column 79, causing floor 13 to fall on 12, 12 on 11, and so on for 9 floors. Well, none of that could have happened. First of all, these beams are fireproofed with cementitious fire type material. They can't even expand, get hot enough to expand. But NIST ignores that fire insulation. And they suggest, well, it did anyway. It pushed this girder off of its seat. Well, that girder could not have been pushed off of its seat on this column 79 because it's got shear studs tied into the concrete slab up above. It can't go sideways. It's got 30 different bolts, if you will, embedded into the concrete up above and welded on the girder. So it couldn't have gone anywhere. But let's say it could have. NIST says it only had to go halfway off of its seat on this column because the flange folded. But the flange is supported by a stiffener, which NIST omitted from their computer modeling conveniently. So they suggest that it wasn't there, but here it is shown in construction. You can see that vertical line right at the end of the flange. So we have a real problem with the NIST report, not the least of which is that it would have taken 60,000 pounds of dynamic force for the 13th floor to fall on the 12th and break the connections, the girder connections, 3 massive girders framing into this column, which is why this floor could never have fallen in the first place. But let's say it did. It couldn't have broken the girder connections below. And had it done that, and the ones below that for 9 floors, and then column 79 buckles, they claim that what happened next was that there's an instability traveling laterally up through the building all the way up to the roof. Well, if that would have happened, we would have had massive breaking up of granite panels and windows on the outside, numbering in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands. So yeah, huge problems for the official narrative. And then they suggest that this instability traveled laterally. The length of a football field is how long this building is, in just 6 seconds, just all of the connections giving up at once. So none of that could have happened. And certainly we would have seen, again, the crumpling up like a beer can of this building. Well, how fast did it come down? In controlled demolition, we have free fall often. Well, this building was clocked by physicist David Chandler, and he found that it came down at 9.8 meters per second squared. What's that? That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. It's accelerating. It's getting faster and faster with every second. So how can it do that? Look at what has to give way without giving any resistance. This massive steel structure, just giving way so that the building could fall without any resistance from any of the 80 columns in this building. Not one of these columns gave any resistance for that 7-second collapse. at least during a third of it, which is actually at free fall. Well, NIST acknowledges the free fall, but they don't acknowledge the implications of that. Where did 40,000 tons of structural steel resistance go? It's just, they don't answer that question, of course. Did these fires destroy 40,000 tons of structural steel so it could give no resistance? No, not happening. So we look at feature number 5. Are those columns dismembered? Well, yeah. We had a 47-story moment-resisting steel frame, fire-protected structure all of a sudden give way like a house of cards, so that there's only a 4 to 6 story pile of building materials here. So does that make sense when we know that buildings that fall due to natural causes fall over? We see a badly damaged building, certainly, but not a house of cards. The columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder, as we'll see. Can these fires cause that level of destruction? No. So do we have witnesses that hear something that could cause that level of destruction, i.e. explosions? Well, let's listen to Daryl, a medical student interviewed that evening.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then
Okay, and Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic who was a first responder, on hand.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
No, nor Bill Rosati, who saw a flash of light.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
So it gets more interesting. And this first responder, Captain Richard Patterson of the FDNY, what did he experience?
1-7 let go as well, and was a series of concussive explosions.
Okay, and this first responder, Patrick Dillon.
I remember feeling that, like it was like freight trains underneath the earth, shaking the earth, even shaking me. That's when we all saw Building 7 crumple in the middle, like way up at the top. It buckled, and then dropped.
Okay, and Richard Rotans, the Deputy Director of New York's Emergency Management Office. What did he see and experience inside the building?
Then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft, and it was down the hall.
An elevator car that was blown out of its shaft. That's down the hall. Think of the explosion it would take inside of an elevator hoistway to blow the cab itself out. So these are explosions inside Building 7 that he saw before it came down. So this is not something that's going to be done by a few beams hitting the outside of Building 7. The elevator cars are on the inside. So we have explosions documented by him, as well as Barry Jennings, who also worked in the Office of Emergency Management.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs, we made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs. Bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 in the vicinity of Building 7?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
How many of these witnesses of explosions do you imagine were included in the NIST report? 0. Not one of them. And they claim to have interviewed 116 first responders. Well, we'll hear a lot more in a moment that they did not tell you about. What about if this was if this was planned in advance, there would be foreknowledge of the destruction of the building. People would know about it in advance, like Chief Nick Visconti, who reports, we're moving the command post over this way. That building's coming down. Well, wait a minute. No steel frame fire protected structure has ever come down by fire alone. And yet he's saying it's going to come down. Well, listen to Chief Pete Hayden.
Well, we had our special operations people set up surveying instruments to monitor and see if there was any movement of the building. We're concerned of the possibility of collapse of the building. And we had a discussion with one particular engineer there, and we asked him if we allowed it to burn, could we anticipate a collapse, and if so, how soon? And it turned out that he was pretty much right on the money, that he said in its current state you have about 5 hours.
What? In its current state, you have about 5 hours. Wait a minute. No steel frame fire protected structure has ever come down by fire. Now, not only is this engineer saying it's going to come down, but it's going to come down in 5 hours. And it did come down in 5 hours. Of course, this prediction could only have been made with foreknowledge. They don't release the name of the engineer. We don't get to know who that was and what his thinking process was. So, gosh, it had a bulge in the southwest corner between floors 10 and 13 is what they said. So if that's true, the building would have tipped over toward the southwest corner, because buildings that are damaged on one side, or particularly one corner, fall to that side. But we didn't see anything like that. In fact, NIST ignores this and has it falling from the opposite corner. There are also others who were aware, like these mysterious construction workers, listening to an explosion over their shoulder, looking back at the building, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. Building is about to blow up. Moving back. All right, guys? Sorry.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. Flame, debris coming down.
What? The building is about to blow up? Now it's not just going to come down. It's going to blow up with flame and debris coming down. Well, interesting. Listen to what Patrick Dillon, first responder, experienced inside the lobby of that building. He was working on the pile of the towers, and he needed a break.
All right. And he pointed to what turned out to be the entrance to Building 7's lobby. He said, go in there, take a break, there's other guys in there, like that. And that's what I did. I finished coming down off the pile and climbed over the wreckage of Vesey, and went in those revolving doors and just kind of fell on the floor. There were other guys in there doing the same thing I was, just shaking their heads and spitting out poison and trying to get their lungs back together again, as I was. And I was on the floor. These battalion chiefs come in through the revolving doors. There was 3 of them. They had the white helmets. I didn't get any IDs off them. But as soon as they stepped inside, what stepped in behind them were these 2 people in black with black ski masks on, and Uzis. And the Uzis were, hanging off their necks. And I don't know what they were or who they were, but the battalion chiefs started yelling at us, right, ordering us to get out of this building. They're going to pull the building. Everybody out now. And they ordered us back out.
Well, the story is getting a lot more interesting now, isn't it? With these Uzis. That story, by the way, is corroborated with our next witness, Captain Richard Patterson.
So he and I made our way over to the entrance of the building. Before we arrived there was a construction worker who happened to be, he emerged from the dust cloud and walked past the chief and I. And he said he had overheard the chief's comment, and he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock. We part ways, we arrive at 7, and there were 2 paramilitarily clad men with black rifles, sunglasses. And as we approached the entrance, they closed ranks and said, one of them said, this building has been secured. Which is odd, because in my experience in the FDNY, anybody preventing access to the fire department in the event of a fire, that's a criminal act. The chief and I were not in a position to argue the point, given the inequality in weaponry present.
Well, fascinating. We can speculate quite a bit about who these thugs might have been. And what their role was, but they were keeping the firefighters from entering the building to put out the fires. That's a crime in any city, by the way. What did Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, experience before he heard those explosions that we heard him talk about? He was held back about 6 blocks away from Building 7, and along with others, because they were told it was going to come down. It had structural damage, is what they were told. He's listening to a radio held in the hand of what he believes was a Red Cross worker, and this is what he hears.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Well, that's interesting. Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What's really going on here? Well, the BBC knew it was going to happen also. In fact, they announced it 20 minutes before it even came down.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Sketchy indeed. They apologized for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. What does that make them psychic, or what's really going on here? Did they have a script they're reading? Well, CNN outdoes them. At 10:45, they announced the collapse of a 50-story building.
In New York, Alan Dodd-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Alan, just a 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash. And
So this is pretty darn interesting, because had that building come down at that time, and there's no other 50-story or 47-story or even any other building at all that collapsed due to the damage when the towers came down. But had this building come down at that time, we wouldn't even have any video of it because of the massive dust clouds released when the Twin Towers went down about 15 minutes before that. So many people in the 9/11 Truth Movement speculate that it was supposed to come down and under the cover of this dust cloud. And that those construction workers going back or coming back from the building announcing that it's going to blow up, that they were fixing a dud that didn't go off that morning at 10:30. Who knows? But it's very interesting to think about, as is the words of Larry Silverstein, the owner of World Trade Center 7, who had also procured the other 6 buildings of the World Trade Center just 2 weeks before 9/11. It was a deal that transferred the ownership from the Port Authority, public hands, to private hands. Larry Silverstein. Listen to what he has to say, though, about the collapse of this building on America Rebuilds on PBS.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Interesting. Well, pull it is a term used in the controlled demolition industry. And he says later, I didn't mean pull it, the building. I meant pull the firefighters out of the building. Well, as you saw earlier, the firefighters were kept out of the building at gunpoint. They were told it's going to come down on its own. And FEMA and NIST acknowledged that there was no firefighting in the building. So how could they pull the firefighters, out of the building? Not going to happen. No efforts made to fight the fires because of a lack of water supply, they said. Well, why? Because the mains broke when the towers went down, is what they said. But guess what? The water mains for the World Trade Center 1 and 2 come from the north, and they all go past Building 7, supplying ample pressure to the sprinkler system in Building 7. So there was plenty of water for Building 7. And that is corroborated by Chief Pete Hayden as well. Do you know whether there was any water available at Building 7? For extinguishment? Yes. My recollection was that there was water available. In fact, there are backup pumps inside the building to pressurize that in case of a lack of pressure. There's fire hydrants, which are charging this hose from the fire hydrant into the fire pump engine to eventually pressurize this hose to put out that car fire down there. These connections are on the building right here, and these are the fire department connections, and they can pressurize those if there isn't enough pressure from the water mains under the street, which there was. They could still pressurize them. They said there's no sprinkler system. In fact, that's why the building came down, according to NIST. But you can see the sprinkler system actively working on this floor where there was a fire before it was put out by this sprinkler. And so we have some real problems with the NIST report, which says that this building would have stood were it not for the lack of water. Well, there's other experts that talk about what really happened here. Danny Jawenko was shown a laptop with building 7 coming down on it. Mm-hmm. And this is the expert in Europe on the demolition. So what does he say upon looking at it?
Danny Jawenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Het heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Very helpful information. He's very clear about what could have caused that, as is Kamal Obeid, structural engineer, who says a localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. He's one of 3 dozen or 4 dozen structural engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. And the University of Alaska at Fairbanks has the chairperson of their structural engineering department, Professor Leroy Halsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country. It caught his attention, this building, because he says, gosh, there are plenty of other high-rises that could suffer similar fate. We've got to get to the bottom of this and find out what really happened. And so he used 2 competing programs, structural engineering finite element analysis programs, to corroborate the same results, which show that in order to achieve the objective of getting the building to fall, like the video does in the center, we have to take out all the columns. Well, that's actually what NIST tried to do on the right with their computer model, but they failed miserably because it starts to tip over. So they stop it. They don't show us it tipped over. They had 8 years to try to back engineer their and support their collapse hypothesis that the building came down by fire. But that's refuted by the NIST, by the University of Alaska, which says fire did not cause the collapse of Building 7. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and the girders. The collapse of Building 7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST. So they pulled the rug out from underneath the NIST report, as does the forensic evidence available in the aftermath of the building's collapse, where we look at evidence of extreme heat provided by who? FEMA, in their limited metallurgical examination in Appendix C in May of 2002 in the Building Performance Assessment Team report, where they document very carefully, never before observed, eutectic reactions causing intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like we see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Fascinating. Fires don't do this to steel. Office fires are only 500 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Steel doesn't melt until about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what they document, the melting of steel with rapid oxidation and sulfidation, liquid iron. That's molten iron. We haven't used iron, by the way, in our skyscrapers for 100 years. Elemental iron. Where is that coming from? Well, we'll see that it turns out to be the byproduct of thermite, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. They are very honest in this report. Where does the sulfur come from? Well, sulfur is perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, according to the New York Times, but completely omitted from the NIST report, who says the sulfur might have come from the gypsum board. Well, there's the sulfur is inert in gypsum board. It's been protecting steel structures for 100 years. It's never turned around and attacked the steel that it's been designed to protect for that long. Interestingly, Jonathan Barnett, one of the fire protection engineers and authors of this report, says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. Well, wait a minute. It takes 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit to evaporate steel. Where are the temperatures coming from? This is like a minimum of 4 times the temperature required, that's available in office fires. And even this structural engineer, Abelhausen Astani Osel, says, I saw melting of girders in the World Trade Center. He got a National Science Foundation grant to study the steel. And he's saying there's melting of the girders, not realizing that office fires don't melt girders, or not, he knows that, but he's suggested later that it happened down in the pile, not during the collapse itself. Well, this is what you saw down in the pile. Molten steel beams, dripping molten steel, white hot, yellow hot, out of the material in the crab claw excavators. We can tell the likelihood of the temperature of molten materials due to its emissivity. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit here, right here in front of our eyes. So we know that there is indeed molten steel and iron here. Iron, as it turns out, and we'll show you that in a moment. We know that it can't come from jet fuel. First of all, no plane hit Building 7. But even at the Twin Towers, jet fuel only burns about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking temperatures of 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit and 3,000 where steel really melts.
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel.
Now we're getting somewhere because we know where these temperatures could have come from. Thermite, 4,000 degrees. We also have a clue as to where the evidence of ignited incendiaries are coming from that are found in the World Trade Center dust by the U.S. Geological Survey in their 2005 particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust, where they find A, melted molybdenum. This is a material that melts at 4,700 degrees, showing extremely high temperatures here in the pile. Not achievable in any narrative of the official account uh, of the collapse of any of these buildings. Evaporated lead, which is 3,200 degrees, documented by R.J. Lee Group, the presence of lead oxide on the surface of the mineral wool insulation indicates existence of extremely high temperatures during the collapse, which caused metallic lead to volatilize, oxidize, and finally condense on the surface of the mineral wool. So they're documenting temperatures exceeding by a factor of 3 anything the official narrative has to offer. And molten iron microspheres. So we now know where these iron microspheres could have come from. That they were molten is proven by their shape, their spherical shape. That they're iron is documented by the U.S. Geological Survey. In fact, the EPA says these are so ubiquitous that they're used to distinguish World Trade Center dust from common office building dust, according to the R.J. Lee Group. And we have up to 6% of some of these dust samples comprising molten iron microspheres. Scientists estimate that there's about 4 tons of these by extrapolation. This is an extraordinary quantity of iron microspheres. R.J. Lee Group says these are formed during the event, not before by the iron workers putting the building together with welding, not afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart, but formed during the event, per the R.J. Lee Group. Well, what does thermite do? Let's run an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one and burn some thermite in a controlled experiment and see what happens. It looks like sparks, thousands of them, but they cool and they fall as iron microspheres in all the World Trade Center dust. Spheres because that's what aerosolized liquids do. They form under pressure. They form themselves into spheres by surface tension. Could that be what's toasting the tops of these cars parked in and around the World Trade Center? Falling liquid droplets of molten iron microspheres. Well, if that was evidence of ignited thermite, and it could only be that, is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah. A team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen collected independently collected samples of the World Trade Center dust. And they start looking at them, and because they're real curious about all of the questions raised at the World Trade Center, and they analyze this dust. They find these red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other. So they're dual layered. So they were applied as a liquid, like paint. In fact, they thought they were paint. But unlike paint, these red-gray chips and the molten iron microspheres are attracted by a magnet. So they have a high iron content. Well, that's interesting. Paint isn't attracted by a magnet. Its iron content in primer paint is not that high. So they do some X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy on the red layer and a test to find out what's in it. They find, wow, there's aluminum in here along with iron. Well, what's that? That's the ingredients of thermite. So this paint has the signature of thermite. Well, they get real curious now. Zoom in with an electron microscope and find iron oxide particles and aluminum particles that are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. very specifically engineered materials, components of thermite, iron oxide crystals, aluminum platelets. They're set in a matrix, in a bed of oxygen, silica, and carbon. That's organic material, which is used in high energy explosives to expand rapidly and knock things over. That's how explosives work. Whereas incendiaries work by means of massive heat. They destroy things at 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. So they do some research and they find out, gosh, what is this stuff that we're finding in the dust? It's called superthermite. It was developed by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in 2005 and earlier. In fact, peer-reviewed published papers prior to this, prior to 2001, in fact, showed that this stuff was developed. It's explosive composites based on thermite reactions. Its constituents of fuel and oxidizer intimately mixed at the nanometer scale. When you get these materials so small that the surface volume increases exponentially, so the chemical reaction happens virtually instantaneously. So you've engineered an incendiary, which works by means of heat, to become more explosive. Well, what the materials documented by Lawrence Livermore Lab did in this study in 2001 is they ignite at about 750 or 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, proving that that's a thermitic response, an energetic nanothermite composite material. So we have, that's the red line. And that's exactly what the blue line does, which is from the World Trade Center dust. And in fact, all 4 samples did just that. They reacted about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. What do you imagine happens when they react? What do they produce? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in all the World Trade Center dust and documented by the USGS and RJ Lee group. So we know exactly where those molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips. As if we didn't know, they're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. This is pretty sophisticated stuff. It's not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. And this peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal documents that the red layer is active, unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. So any criminal investigator or journalist doing their job could find out where this is made and review this 25-page peer-reviewed paper and tell the story. They could break the story, even though it was published back in 2009 by this team of 8 experts. Well, all of this evidence together is quite compelling and is evidence of destruction with explosives and incendiaries. Not any one of these 10 characteristic features, and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition, can be accountable for in the official narrative or by fire. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative eyewitness testimony, that becomes proof of controlled demolition, proof beyond a doubt that's convinced more than 3,500 600 architects and engineers to demand a new investigation. So, yeah, we've got to get this evidence not only to them, but into the grand jury, which is the effort of the film series 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. Here is the trailer.
No matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury.
This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down, were basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations not only for our filings with the grand jury, also as presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jurors during each episode.
So we want to encourage everyone to watch the first episode. We released it on September 11th, and the second episode will be coming in a couple of weeks, and encourage you to take part and co-produce the film series along with us. We do need your help. We're in the editing stage. Everything has been filmed, but we've got a lot of editing work to do for 2 to 3 dozen episodes. And they do include the evidence of the Twin Towers. Because if you're convinced by this point that Building 7 was a controlled demolition, you might be saying to yourself, well, yeah, I can see that, but not the Twin Towers. They couldn't have gotten away with that one. Well, let's look, shall we? Building 7 was part of the conspiracy of 9/11. We have to at least look at the evidence, and we start by showing the destruction of both towers at the same time, though they came down 15 minutes apart. What do we see? Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, laterally ejected, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Well, at this point, we know what those thick white smoke clouds are. That is the aluminum oxide ash, the other byproduct of thermite in addition to molten iron. And so we know that's true because guess what? Steel is not flammable under office fire conditions. So this can only be the ongoing chemical reaction of thermite at the ends of these columns. So let's get into it. We have, in fact, evidence of controlled demolition that we've already looked at for Building 7. Let's look at the typical features as they might apply to the Twin Towers. Starting with feature number 1, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, the upper block of the tower is at rest, in this case, the North Tower, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward acceleration. There's no jolt, no hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below the point of plane impacts. So that's a dead giveaway of that the structure is being removed underneath it. Same with the South Tower. It's still, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. Well, we're told that the upper block destroys the cold, hard, heavier, intact steel below and then destroys itself. This is called the crush down, crush up theory. And this was put together, not Siri, but theory.
Siri wants to jump in on the conversation.
Oh, yeah, she's all excited now. This was put together by Professor Zdeněk Bazant from Northwestern University in Chicago. It's the most obfuscated paper ever made. It took the engineers 10 years to decode it. And guess what? It was submitted just 2 days after 9/11. The rest of us were in shock, trying to figure out when the next plane's coming. Who did this to us? Who's doing this to us? And not this guy. He's in his den, apparently cranking 24 hours a day until he comes up with the theory that is still the theoretical basis of NIST's column failure theory, which we'll look at. Well, here it is. The upper part is supposed to have destroyed the lower part, but Newton's third law of motion says no. There's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Well, run a Mack truck into a Volkswagen and see what happens. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The upper, weaker part cannot possibly destroy the cold, hard, heavier, intact steel. It's a virtual pyramid. In fact, look at the columns at the top. They're light, but they get heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier until about halfway down, they're 16 inches by 30 inches by 16 inches and 2 inches thick. But they get heavier and heavier as they go down until at the bottom, they are 52 inches by 22 inches, almost solid steel. The Volkswagen is not going to be destroying this steel down here, right? Or even at mid-height. In fact, if you look at the destruction, it's not. It's destroying itself. The Volkswagen is destroying itself in the first 3 seconds. Take a look at it this way. Watch the lower red line. There's no movement down until maybe now. So the upper part is being destroyed. And you can ask, well, what's destroying it? Well, we've already got a sense that these columns are being removed. And because if they weren't, and they were there, and there was an upper part destroying the lower part, we would see it riding this wave down to the ground. But none of the photos or videos show an upper part destroying the lower part. If it were there, it would have destroyed these few remaining columns standing 1,000 feet in the air for another 6 seconds before they also fall. So they couldn't have survived a pile driver 15 stories tall that was supposed to be crushing it. No, something else is going on here, and it looks suspiciously like a volcanic eruption. In fact, can you tell which one is the volcanic eruption and which one is the North Tower being destroyed?
Look the same.
They do. They're very similar, but I'll make it easier on you. So, yeah, we know the volcanic eruption is on the right. What's the similarity? Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects trailed by thick white smoke clouds. And now we know that's aluminum oxide in the case of World Trade Center 1. So, back to that theory. It's not the upper part destroying the lower part. We know that because it doesn't destroy those columns standing 1,000 feet almost in the air. So there's explosions blowing the towers away from the core, which then remains standing. It's out and down. So the NIST report completely ignores this, of course. They were paid $20 million of your tax money to determine how and why all three of these towers collapsed. But they ignore all the evidence that we've been looking at and that we're going to be looking at, especially with the witnesses of explosions and flashes of light, 186 of them now found by Professor Graham McQueen, who read all 12,000 pages of testimony from the first responders recorded within a month after 9/11. Let's look at a few of them. We felt the ground shake. You could see the towers sway, and then it just came down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, 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 the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building? With each popping sound, initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building. Then it would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. So you hear this specific order of events. They're hearing, they're seeing, they're feeling a phenomena associated with explosions, and then the tower collapses. So there's a cause and effect here, which is pretty obvious. I saw low-level flashes. I saw a flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all 4 sides. Materials shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. There was an explosion in the South Tower, 1 floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, seemed like it was going all the way around, like a belt. All these explosions. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. We actually heard the pops, you know? You heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors. Then there was a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud, earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, you know, like when they demolished a building? That's what I thought I saw. Did you see any flashes? I said, yeah, I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody, I think, at that point still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. Pretty clear about what he heard. NIST claims to have interviewed 116 first responders. They missed 186, which we just heard a few of. Apparently, because they didn't report any of these witnesses' testimony. Feature number 3, is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Well, actually, the building begins to fall over. It's at 22 degrees, in fact, and falling off the building. So it has asymmetrical loading from this load on the structure below, has asymmetrical damage from the fires and asymmetrical damage from the planes. How in the world then do we get complete symmetrical damage, just like the firefighters described, like a belt all the way around these of explosions all the way around the building? Well, let's zoom in on the leading corner of these explosions in this looped video and ask ourselves, what are we seeing here? I see about a dozen or more individual explosions that appear to be coming from just inside the perimeter structure, floor by floor. This is not a collapse. This is not a nuclear weapon destroying the building. These are individual pre-placed explosives. That's all they could be. They're not energy weapons either, or the results of. So we've got to realize what we're looking at here and come to grips with it. We see those individual isolated explosive ejections occurring as far down as 20 stories below what we're told is a collapse, 40 stories below what we're told is a collapse. In fact, they occur as far down as 60 stories below what we're told is a collapse. There's no accounting for these squibs, which is a term in the controlled demolition industry, isolated explosive ejections, perhaps mistimed. Well, we see a dozen of them coming out of the left side of the south tower almost all at once in this looped video. Now we know why these towers, this upper block is not destroying the block below, because it's being destroyed in the first few seconds where its rigidity is gone. There's nothing left after about now to drive the rest of the building down to the ground. And how fast is this destruction going? Well, it's documented again by physics teacher David Chandler at 64% of free fall, meaning it's accelerating almost as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. But there's some resistance that calculates to be 90% of the resistance of the columns had to have been removed so that this building could still fall at almost free fall acceleration. Through what? A lot of steel on the perimeter. More steel than glass. 70 to 80,000 tons of structural steel below the point of plane impacts, giving almost no resistance. 90% of it had to have been removed because it came down at 2/3 of free fall. Through what? 47 massive core columns, 240 steel perimeter columns, almost as if they were not even there. Well, let's look at the lateral ejection of the steel, because these are 4 and 8 ton structural steel connections ejected laterally, landing up to 600 feet, destroying the Winter Gardens 600 feet away from the South Tower, impaling themselves into skyscrapers all around the Twin Towers. Individual, freely flying, structural steel sections traveling up to 600 feet in every direction, like this one, which is about to hit World Trade Center 7. Wait a minute. Back, 2, forward, 2, back, 2. It starts out horizontally. How does gravity work? Down. Something else is going on here. it's ejected laterally and hitting World Trade Center 7, 300 or 400 feet away. There's enough energy to fire a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. And a lot of cannonballs here, hundreds and hundreds of them. This is a 1,200-foot diameter debris field, well beyond the boundary of World Trade Center Plaza. And by the way, if 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the tower's footprint, I have a question for you. What's crushing the building? This steel is outside the footprint, almost all of it, as you can see. There's not much left. There's nothing left to crush well, maybe there is. The concrete, the floors, maybe they're all stacked up and found piled at the bottom. Let's look at them. Because there was 110 floors, each an acre in size. Poured concrete over, metal decking over, lightweight steel trusses. We're missing about 110 of them. I mean, literally, we don't find 50. We don't find 10. We don't find 1 acre size floor or half acre or quarter acre or a 1/16 of an acre size floor. Where are they? When we have a pancaking collapse, we have pancakes stacked up at the bottom like this earthquake damaged building in Mexico. Where is all the concrete? Oh, there it is. Pulverized in midair. 90,000 tons of concrete. All the photos, all the videos show it being pulverized to 100 micron particles as tested by the U.S. Geological Survey, and distributed where? Laterally. Across what? Lower Manhattan. From river to river in a 3 square mile area, a 3-inch thick blanket of powdered concrete substantially. 30% of this material is concrete. Well, wait a minute. If that's true, what's crushing the building? If 90,000 tons of concrete is pulverized and spread over 3 square mile. It's not the concrete. Hey, it wasn't the steel either. Neither. Comprising up to 2/3 of the weight of this building is available to crush the building. And yet, all of that weight was used in this obfuscated paper to crush the building below. It's complete fraud. And not only was all the weight used, but they doubled the mass up above on top of that, and they reduced the column energy absorption capacity by more than 3 times below that. So they rigged it more than 12-1 in favor of a collapse. Complete fraud on the part of Zdeněk Bezant. Well, goodness gracious, this was challenged by engineers. Richard Johns, Tony Zambodi, Gregory Zudolinski, but the American Society of Civil Engineers, who published the previous peer-reviewed paper from Zdeněk Bezant, they won't publish the challenge. Why? They said it's out of scope. That's all they said. Wait a minute. How can it be out of scope to publish a challenge to a previously published paper? That's what we do in peer-reviewed science, in peer-reviewed journals. So there's a lawsuit going on, you better believe, and this remains to be decided. But just asking ourselves, if there was a demolition, how did they have access to plant these charges in this building? Well, one possibility is provided to us by Kevin Ryan in his excellent website, digwithin.net. In the paper, Demolition Access, he tells us that there was a fireproofing upgrade on several floors of each of these towers. And in fact, some of those floors coincided directly with the point of plane impacts. Coincidence? Liquid applied nanothermite could have been used in an undercover operation with the applicators told that it was intumescent paint, a liquid applied fireproofing. So that's a possibility. It needs to be investigated further. How else might they have done it? Well, through the elevator shafts, you have access to the core columns and beams in the building. What if you had an elevator modernization, like the largest one in the world, documented in Elevator World in March of 2001, 8 or 9 months before 9/11. The Port Authority gave the largest and most sophisticated elevator modernization program in history to a small maintenance company, Ace Elevator, with basically one customer. Otis Elevator had installed the elevators, had been maintaining them up to this contract. But all of a sudden, this company comes out of nowhere, providing what? Possible access to the elevator shafts and core columns in the building. So, unfortunately, Ace Elevator wasn't on hand that day because of a labor dispute. So they weren't in the building. 50 of them were pulled out to a union meeting to discuss some business. Wow. That needs to be investigated. Of course, they went out of business immediately after 9/11. Well, what happened to the steel that fell all around outside the perimeter of the towers? 180,000 tons of it all together, and easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. We have up to 400 truckloads per day removing the steel starting just 2 weeks after 9/11. This is the forensic evidence. It was shipped to China for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic investigation. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, "Crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China," showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But it didn't. And so we have 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition, amounting, none of which, by the way, can be created by fire, let alone all of them, with additional circumstantial evidence, corroborative testimony. We have proof of controlled demolition, the body of proof that has convinced those 3,600 architects and engineers, many of which appeared, as you've already seen, in 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, an unprecedented film series taking the hard evidence of the 9/11 crimes to court. So we encourage you to take part in that, as we mentioned, at 911c2c.org, where you can watch the first episode that was released on September 9th. And in a couple of weeks, the second episode. And the other documentaries, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, that I've made. And Dylan Avery made 7, the story of the Halsey study at the University of Alaska and their challenge to the NIST report. And the documentary just on Building 7, 15 minutes. We have actor Ed Asner narrating this exceptional documentary. And all this evidence we've been talking about is nicely included in a brochure, so you can hand it out on the street. You can download it, print it for free, and or get 100 of them for $10. We got to get to the bottom of what's really going on here, because as documented by Brown University, the cost of these wars was incredible. I mean, check it out, 14 trillion on the Afghanistan 20-year war, the longest war in U.S. history, all based on a lie, the attack on the World Trade Center towers, blamed on Muslims. So let's go into Iraq and Afghanistan and get those Saudis who were the hijackers, right? They weren't even Afghanis, or anyway, we got a lot more discussion there. But look at the consequences of 9/11. We have the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan killing 2 million people, a global war on terror, the loss of our civil liberties through the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and the National Defense Authorization Act, draining our treasury, decimating our civil liberties. Any of us can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be tortured and even assassinated. American citizens by our own government. And now in the last week, with yet a new executive order saying that the military now has the authority to kill Americans on American soil. Check it out. The truth about 9/11 is very dark and very pressing. It is not history. It is the aftermath we're about to see the horrible results of. So where do we draw our line in the sand? Do we wait for the next 9/11? Well, I have news. It came and left twice, with the disease that was engineered as a bioweapon, its solution, the false solution to the false disease. Over the last 3 years, we also have the Gaza invasion of Israel, which was obviously a false flag operation where Israel let that happen and had a hand in making it happen as well. So that event I discuss in a 2-hour presentation, which is available on my website, richardgage911.org. I've been speaking the truth about 9/11. I'm asking everybody to. We might feel like we're just a millimeter-sized domino, but look what leverage we can have when we're strategic.
Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
And that's what we're up against. A lot of increasingly sized dominoes. The deep state is entrenched and entangled in our government. And that's how 9/11 could happen at the highest levels. And so we have to speak out. And we're not powerless. We're not trapped in the matrix with agents and demons and vampire energies. Hey, they're trapped in here with us. When we realize who we are And when we work together and share this podcast with your friends, relatives, your colleagues, everybody you know, every architect and engineer you can find, don't withhold this evidence from them for fear of being called a conspiracy theorist. Use the 3,600 architects and engineers who are lined up to help you overcome that kind of criticism. So take heart and confidence and use us. Put us to work. That's what we need. Don't you think, Kevin?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Richard. And you know, what's amazing about your presentation in particular and how addressing this manner, even if I wanted to play devil's advocate right now and question the fine, there's nothing I can play devil's advocate about with everything that you presented, because you've covered every single base, every single fault within their theories, completely deconstructed the official narrative with facts, science, reasoning, and that's a lot of times when we're called conspiracy theorists or we're demonized in our social circles. It's like, you have no evidence. You have no, so with a presentation like this, it's undeniable. It's undeniable, what the truth actually is. And I think with sharing it, with just being open about it, hey, watch this. Make your own conclusions on it. Don't just take my word for it. Do your own research, which is really what we all want everybody to do. I mean, the truth becomes undeniable about what has taken place, what is taking place. And I think knowing that and seeing how it all compiles and stacks up, and for me, it leaves me feeling empowered in the knowing what the truth is. And here it is laid out. I can't think of a question for devil's advocate purposes, in the sense to try and deconstruct it. Here it is. If you guys got devil's advocate questions, sure, fire away. But for me, the truth is so clear, and that, to me, that feels very empowering to hold the keys to our freedom. To, hey, here it is. Now, let's go move forward with this truth, right? Yeah. Let's rally around that, And I know a lot of people would, watch this, and I think we all want accountability. We all want justice. I mean, what is your vision of accountability and how we because this is obviously, when we're looking at who's behind 9/11, and it's the government and it's the deep state. What is your vision for how we can truly gain accountability and justice when it is such a large scale, deeply entrenched operation that's taken place? And a lot of the people who we would go to for accountability in the past, they're kind of the ones, looking like they might be behind this type of operation.
Yeah. And the same thing over the last 3 years. Look at the deep entrenchment through all of the hospitals, through all the medical establishment and pharmacy industry. It is shocking at how effective the media was as tools of advertising for the pharmacy industry, for their false solution. So that's a huge wake-up call, which is why I've been cross-pollinating with the health freedom movement, presenting my two-hour presentation on the false flag of the last 3 years, and also waking them up to 9/11, because they interweave. It's called the parallels between 9/11 and, as JP Sears says, COVID. So when we become more empowered with knowledge, when we see the connection of these dots, the playbook that was used on 9/11 has been altered and used over the last 3 years, and on October 7th as well, with some adjustments. So In fact, when people really get this, it it blows me away. We have insider trading, and with foreknowledge, we have predictive programming in each case. These events before they happen, they kind of condition the public. We have drills, is also foreknowledge. The abuse of science, the creating a climate of fear, a solution far worse than the original problem, right? Millions of people are dying. False accounts by officials, extreme control of the narrative with censorship, no real investigation, an elusive, powerful enemy in each case. Think about it. Control of information in a shifting narrative by top agencies, the attacks on critical questioning, the implementation of draconian policies and surveillance. That's just among the few parallels that we discuss in these other presentations available at richardgage911.org. If people, the way we get accountability is to share information and have a growing awareness of the truth among the populace. If we sit on this information, nothing happens, and we deserve what we get, which will be a police state.
Yeah, definitely. And it really does bring a sense of accountability upon ourselves to share the information and to be open and to be honest and not worry about, I've had my, when I first started speaking out about things, 2020 in particular, I had the friend groups and family members and say, you are nuts. You're very, I've lost who I thought were lifelong friends over just my opinions and speaking out and say, this is what I'm seeing. Let's have some discussions. Right. Yeah. And I think that going through that, and I can say for certain, having to maybe go through that initially is a lot better than going and living in a draconian police state. I'd rather have those uncomfortable conversations, and I'd rather, put myself out there and be vulnerable in that sense, but stand empowered in what I know, than have to deal with the consequences of, and sitting there and saying, well, I wish I had said something. I wish I could have done more. And, there's countless times in history where you hear people say those exact words, right? And where they saw atrocity, they saw genocide, they saw the destruction of human rights. And, it's happening all over the world right now. As we speak, we're still seeing the fallout of the medical scam and what's happening every day on the West Bank, right? And whereas people are still suffering. There was just a good documentary put out called Starving Gaza, where they're blocking food and humanitarian aid to just ordinary women and children, right? There's the famine that's happening. A famine is a controlled operation. Famines just don't happen in wartime unless it's controlled to do so. So it's, unless we speak, if we're going to speak out about these things, well, that's how we are going to spread the awareness and spread the truth. And you're right, get accountability. I think we just need to demand it ourselves, and that to me feels like the solution. And it leaves me feeling empowered, and to know this and to be able to do it, and to have you on and discuss all of this, because I said you've been doing this work since for 15, 20 years now, and it's remarkable to see. And have you seen a shift in, just in general awareness and acceptance of the willingness to have these conversations and to uncover the truth? Because you've been doing this longer than I have. And, do you have a more optimistic outlook than you did, say, when you first started uncovering this?
Yes. There are different metrics one can apply to try to gain understanding about our level of success in getting accountability and justice for the family members. One of them is how many people seem to be aware of this. If you talk to people on the street, I'll just bring it up, right? And most people are aware that there's serious questions about 9/11 at a minimum. A good percentage of those people are calling for, I don't know how actively, but they're realizing we got to have a real investigation. On the other hand, we used to have every September 11th for about 6-7 years after 9/11, we would have protests in New York and in cities all around the country, or at least action events where people are taking civic action to educate people on the sidewalk with brochures and so forth. That's not happening as much these days, and it's a little disappointing. But I've been busier than I ever have as a speaker, and Gail and I have gone to a dozen different speaking events. We've been invited to speak the same presentation that we just gave, in fact, to hundreds of people at a time. So it is picking up again. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think it's kind of like the domino effect, like you saw in your presentation, right? I feel like we've already pushed the first domino over, and just the natural course of things. It takes time to bring about large scale changes and really hold these larger scale groups and institutions accountable and to make change. But to me, the conversations and the ripple effect from them is that domino effect. And, you know, the conversations we're having 15, 20 years from now, you know, it's going to be the ripple effect from what we're doing now. It's going to be profound in my opinion, because I don't see how, once the truth gets out, it's very difficult to contain, you know, especially when we're looking at historical events. You know, a lie can spread, that saying, a lie can spread around the world quicker. Like it can, before the truth even puts its shoes on, the lie is spread around the whole world, right? But once the truth got its shoes on and it starts making its way, it's like, oh, okay, I see what's going on now. And I do think that's why censorship is increasing so much. We're seeing these a lot of more propaganda, false flags starting to pick up. And I think, to me, that's a sign that the controllers view it as necessary to put in those measures because the truth is coming out in the way that it is. Censorship wasn't a huge thing when you were doing these presentations 10 years ago. You know, you could post whatever you wanted on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, so
no, that's a good point. Yeah.
So
we're making progress here.
Definitely. Absolutely. And so Richard, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us. I mean, I know you've mentioned it a few times during the show, but you know, for anybody who wants to continue to engage in this, just as another reminder, and this will all be in the episode show notes as well, but where would you, you know, where would you want to send them with your websites, documentaries, and where can people continue to further go on this journey for themselves in uncovering the truth?
Yes, you'll find the documentary 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom on our website, richardgage911.org, and encourage people to get involved in as virtual grand jurors as this evidence keeps coming out every few weeks. In each new episode, episode 2 of 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom is coming out in a couple of weeks. So be a part of the action and help us fund it. We've got to have the support from you in order to produce the episodes. We're in editing right now. We've got a wonderful editor in Australia, and we've got to keep him rolling so we can get through. This is the most comprehensive body of evidence and intended for a grand jury. So we have a legal imperative to supplement the existing 60 exhibits that have been given already to the U.S. Attorney with this crime scene to courtroom project.
Beautiful. Well,
please help.
Absolutely. And I definitely will. And I encourage all the listeners and viewers to do the same, because like I said, for me, this is like smoking gun evidence, irrefutable. Like it's the truth is right there. And the work you've done over the years is remarkable to bring this about. And I thank you for doing it and continuing to press the issue forward, because it makes a profound impact. You know, it's certainly, I had my suspicions of 9/11, certainly, but you are probably the I can say certainly viewing your presentations and viewing your work, it was okay, that's it right there. There it is. There's the truth. Like all of you've really done a fantastic job for
Thank you.
bringing all the evidence together. So I'm grateful to be able to have you on. And, as this moves along, I'd love to have you back on the show, and whether for continued 9/11 discussions or even your other presentations as well, because I think, like you said, all the dots really do connect. And this is kind of painting a much larger picture for what's taking place on a global scale. Because certainly at some point there will be more false flags. Unfortunately, there will be more things. And I think if we can recognize the signs as they come and say, this looks familiar, we'll be able to snuff it out from the beginning, which I think that would be a little more ideal than having to look back 20 years after the fact and say, well, okay, now we can piece it together. Let's let the truth stand right from the beginning, which is the work you're doing now. It's setting the foundation for that. So
yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that, Evan. I encourage everybody to again share this with everybody you know.
Absolutely. And I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in, keeping an open mind and open heart, and share this out to anybody who you think might be interested. You never know, if you have a hunch, you never know who is open to this type of discussions. So I would say share it with everybody, post it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, and let the truth speak for itself in a sense. So thanks to all the listeners for tuning in. We will see everybody on the next episode. Special thank you to Richard for coming on the show. All the links to go support Richard are right in the show notes below. Seriously, go on, watch his other documentaries, watch his other presentations, share it out, tell a friend. Let's get the conversation going, because this is an important subject matter, and we can really start piecing together the truth. And it's up to us to bring accountability for those who perpetrated mass genocide on us, the people. And we really need to band together to let the truth be known and put this out there. So special thank you to Richard for coming on the show. I really appreciate him and his body of work that he's been doing for the last several years, and that he will continue to do and continue to shine a bright light on such an important subject. So if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe wherever you're at. You can leave us a review. Go purchase my book, The Final Judgment. Let's go on Amazon. It's right there. Link to do so is in the episode show notes. Head on over to Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. You can book a tarot reading with me if you want. And special thank you to our official sponsor, our only sponsor, Tranquil Desires, here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. It's going to wrap up this episode, ladies and gentlemen, and I will see you all next time. So long.